It has long been a source of some private regret to me that, in the course of publishing these accounts of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I have been compelled by considerations of space, discretion, or the occasional unfinished nature of my own notes to leave certain cases undocumented. Some were too trivial, others too terrible, and a few, like the matter of the unfortunate solicitor from Beddleton, were simply pushed from my mind by the whirlwind of activity that so often surrounded our quarters at 221B Baker Street. It is only now, in the autumn of my years, that in sorting through a dusty sea chest of papers, I have come across the much-faded manuscript detailing this very affair. The heading, in my own hand, reads simply, "The Tall Man." Reading it again, the entire grotesque business came rushing back to me, and I feel it my duty to lay the facts, in their entirety, before the public. Our involvement began upon a raw and foggy morning in November. The soupy, yellow gloom of the London streets had penetrated our very sitting room, blurring the familiar outlines of the scientific charts and the chemical bench, and casting a pall over Holmes's already sombre mood. He had been pacing the floor for the better part of an hour, a pipe clenched between his teeth, his brow furrowed in thought, his mind clearly grappling with some problem of its own devising, for we had no case afoot to occupy him. "Watson, the criminal world of this great city is a disgrace," he remarked suddenly, stopping before the fire. "It has fallen into a lamentable state of mediocrity. Where are the great and audacious minds of yesteryear? Where is the modern Moriarty? I am a Stradivarius left in its case, my dear fellow, an engine of discovery rusting from disuse." "Perhaps a touch of breakfast would improve your outlook, Holmes," I suggested, for Mrs. Hudson had just entered with a laden tray. Before he could offer a sardonic reply, a clatter of feet upon the stairs announced a visitor. The door flew open, and a man stumbled into the room, his face the colour of putty, his eyes wide with a terror that was shocking to behold. He was a man of middle height, inclined to stoutness, and dressed in the respectable but somewhat provincial garb of a country solicitor. Yet his clothing hung loosely upon his frame, and the trembling of his hands was so violent that he could scarcely remove his hat. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he gasped, his gaze darting about the room as if he expected an assailant to materialize from the very shadows. "I am he," said my friend, his listlessness vanishing in an instant. His eyes narrowed, and he took in our visitor with that singular, all-encompassing glance of his. "Pray be seated. You have travelled up from the West Country this morning, I perceive. You are a man of sedentary habits, a solicitor by trade, and you are in the grip of a mortal fear which has plagued you for some weeks. What is it that has driven you from your practice in, may I venture, Beddleton?" Our visitor sank into the armchair Holmes had indicated, his jaw agape. "Good heavens! How could you know all that? The clay upon your boots is of a reddish-brown marl, quite distinct from our London mud," Holmes explained, waving a dismissive hand. "Your suit is cut by a country tailor, yet your hands, though ill-kept at present, show the softness of one who works at a desk. As for your hometown, the return ticket half protruding from your waistcoat pocket bears the name Beddleton. The rest is elementary. You have lost at least a stone in weight since that suit was made for you, and no man's face becomes so haggard without a profound and persistent cause. Now, sir, your name and your trouble." "My name," our client stammered, "is James Wilson, and my trouble is a man named Silas Hobbs." He proceeded to unfold a tale so bizarre that I, at first, questioned the man's sanity. Mr. Wilson, now a pillar of his local community in the small market town of Beddleton, confessed to a wild and dissolute youth. In his early 20s, long before he had settled into his profession, he had fallen in with a dangerous crowd in the industrial heart of Birmingham. To my astonishment, he admitted that this gang was a company of coiners, counterfeiters of the Queen's currency. "It was a foolish, wicked time, Mr. Holmes," he said, wiping beads of sweat from his brow. "I was impressionable, and the lure of easy money was strong. The leader of our ring was a man named Ephraim Hobbs, a master metallurgist of astonishing skill. But I soon realized the gravity of my crimes and the peril I was in. I went to the police." "You turned Queen's evidence," Holmes stated, his face impassive. "I did. My testimony sent Ephraim Hobbs to penal servitude for a very long stretch. I was given a chance to start anew. I changed my name, moved to Beddleton, and have lived an honest and God-fearing life for 20 years. I believed that Ghost was laid to rest forever. Until now? Until 6 weeks ago. A new patient came to my doctor, a man of immense height and skeletal thinness. The doctor mentioned him to me in passing, remarking on his gaunt appearance. The man's name was given as Hobbs. "Mr. Holmes, it is Ephraim's son, Silas. I knew it in my bones. He has his father's eyes and a frame that makes him stand a full head above any man in our town. Ephraim himself was a giant. What has this Silas Hobbs done? He has done nothing, and yet he has done everything. He has begun to haunt me. He does not speak, he does not threaten. He simply appears. I see him across the market square, his tall, lean figure motionless, his eyes fixed upon me. I look up from my desk, and he is standing across the street, a silent sentinel of vengeance. One night, to my horror, I saw his pale, long face peering in at me over the garden wall. My nerve is utterly shattered. I cannot eat or sleep. The police can do nothing. He breaks no law. But I know, Mr. Holmes, I know with a chilling certainty that he is waiting for his moment to exact a terrible revenge for his father." "And what brings you to London?" "He has followed me. I came to the city hoping to lose him, to consult a specialist for my nerves. But as I alighted at Paddington, I saw him at the far end of the platform, a gaunt spectre in the steam. I fled here to the one man in all of England who might save me. He does not know this address, but it is only a matter of time. He is hunting me, Mr. Holmes, and I believe he means to kill me." The man's terror was palpable. Holmes sat for a moment in silence, his steepled fingers pressed to his lips. "The matter presents certain points of interest," he said at last. "This campaign of psychological torment is more subtle than the bludgeon or the knife. Tell me, Mr. Wilson, what became of the elder Hobbs? He died in prison some 5 years ago, I believe. And the son, Silas? What is his occupation in Beddleton?" "He has taken a position as a clerk at the local timber yard, a menial role. He lives in a small rented room above a baker's shop. He is, by all accounts, a quiet and solitary man." "Quiet, yet persistent. Very well, Mr. Wilson, I shall take your case. I advise you to remain here. Mrs. Hudson will show you to the spare room. You will be safer within these walls than anywhere else in London. Watson, be so good as to fetch your service revolver. It is possible our tall friend may grow bolder." As I rose to do his bidding, Holmes was already scribbling upon a telegram form. "I am wiring the Beddleton Constabulary cease," he explained. "I wish to confirm the details of the original coining case against one Ephraim Hobbs 20 years ago in Birmingham. One must always begin by verifying the client's foundation of facts. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. For 2 hours we waited, while our client paced the guest room overhead like a caged animal. At last, the reply came. Holmes tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the contents. A look of the most profound surprise crossed his features. "Well now," he murmured, handing the telegram to me. "This is a very singular development indeed. What do you make of it, Watson?" I read the brief message. Holmes, 221B, Baker. Ephraim Hobbs, Coining, Birmingham. No record of any such case in our archives. No constable recalls conviction. Local timber yard confirms Silas Hobbs, employed continuously for 6 months, has not left Beddleton. Earnestly suggest your client is mistaken. Inspector Reed, Beddleton. "Good heavens, Holmes," I cried. "The man is delusional. The entire story is a fabrication of a diseased mind." "Is it, Watson?" Holmes's grey eyes gleamed with a sudden fierce light. "Or is it perhaps that the truth is 100 times more complex and 1,000 times more dangerous than the fiction he has presented to us? Our client is a liar, that much is certain. He is in mortal terror, that is also certain. But he is not afraid of the man in Beddleton. No, he is afraid of a tall man here in London. The question is, why has he concocted such an elaborate falsehood to obtain our help? This case, my dear Watson, has just become infinitely more interesting." He sprang from his chair and seized his hat and coat. "Come, Watson, the game is afoot. We are no longer hunting a man, we are hunting a lie, and within that lie, I have no doubt, we shall find a most deadly truth." Our first move was a curious one. Holmes led me not to the telegraph office nor to Scotland Yard, but to a small dusty library in the heart of Bloomsbury, a place that specialized in obscure provincial newspapers. For the better part of an hour he was lost in the musty archives of the Birmingham Daily Post, poring over editions from 2 decades prior. I watched, perplexed, as he scanned column after column, his long, thin finger tracing the lines of print, a frown of concentration on his face. "Ah!" he ejaculated at last, stabbing the page with his finger. "I thought as much. Listen to this, Watson. It is a small report, tucked away amongst the market prices and shipping news. Tragic workshop fire in Jewellery Quarter. The premises of Mr. Ephraim Hobbs, a noted artisan and metallurgist, were consumed last night by a sudden and devastating fire. Mr. Hobbs, who resided above the workshop, is missing and presumed to have perished in the blaze. A second man, believed to be an apprentice, also remains unaccounted for. The cause of the fire is under investigation, though neighbours report hearing a loud explosive sound shortly before the alarm was raised." "But Holmes," I protested, "Wilson said Hobbs was sent to prison." "Precisely, my dear fellow. Wilson has lied about the man's fate, but not, I think, about his existence or his profession. He has substituted a fiction of legal justice for a reality of fire and death. Why? Perhaps to conceal his own proximity to that very fire. Let us proceed upon the hypothesis that Wilson was the unaccounted-for apprentice. He fled, not the law, but a catastrophe of his own making, and he took something with him, something another party now wishes to reclaim." Our next stop was Paddington Station. Here Holmes engaged in a lengthy conversation with the station master and several porters. His questions were specific. Had they seen a man matching James Wilson's description arriving that morning? And more importantly, had they seen another man, exceptionally tall and gaunt, in his vicinity? After several fruitless inquiries, we found a veteran porter who recalled our man. "Aye, sir, I remember him. Looked like he'd seen a ghost, he did. White as a sheet. Came in on the 8:15 from Beddleton." "And was there anyone with him? Or near him?" Holmes pressed, slipping a half-crown into the man's hand. The porter pocketed the coin and scratched his head. "Now that you mention it, sir, there was a rum cove on that platform. Tall as a lamppost he was, and thin as a rail. Dressed all in black. He didn't get off the train, mind. He was waiting. Seemed to me he was waiting for the gentleman, the solicitor-looking one. When your man scurried off, the tall fellow just watched him go, then melted back into the crowd. Gave me a queer turn, he did." "This proves it, Watson," Holmes declared as we hailed a hansom. "The tall man is real, and he is here in London. Wilson's story about Silas Hobbs in Beddleton was a clever piece of misdirection. He used a real person, the innocent son of his former associate, as a decoy to mask the identity of his true pursuer. He feared that if he gave us the real name, we might uncover a truth he desperately wants to keep buried. But what is that truth, Holmes? What crime is at the heart of this? That is what we must discover. The original report mentioned Hobbs was a noted artisan and metallurgist in the jewellery quarter. Wilson spoke of coining. Let us put the two together. What if their work was not the crude forging of shillings and pence, but something far more refined? This line of reasoning led us to the British Museum. To my utter bewilderment, Holmes spent the next 2 hours in the galleries of Antiquities, specifically among the collections of Greek and Roman coinage. He conversed quietly with one of the curators, a desiccated, scholarly man who seemed to know Holmes well. They spoke in low tones, examining ancient gold staters and silver tetradrachms through a magnifying glass, their heads bent close together over the velvet-lined trays. I grew impatient, seeing little connection between these ancient relics and the terrified solicitor currently hiding in our rooms. But when Holmes finally rejoined me, his eyes were shining with the thrill of the chase. "Watson, we are dealing with a master criminal of the highest order," he said, his voice tense with excitement. "The curator confirms my suspicion. In the last year, several almost undetectable forgeries of extremely rare classical coins have appeared on the European market. They are of such exquisite quality that they have fooled experts. The forger is not merely a common criminal, but an artist, a historian, and a chemist combined. The alloy in particular is a work of genius, perfectly replicating the debasement of ancient gold." "And you believe Ephraim Hobbs was this artist?" "I believe Hobbs was the metallurgist, the man who created the unique alloy. But the engraver, the man with the steady hand and the classical knowledge to carve the dies, was our client, Mr. James Wilson. That was the secret of his past. The fire in the workshop was no accident. I suspect a quarrel over profits. Wilson, thinking Hobbs dead, fled with the most valuable assets of the enterprise. The master dies, and perhaps a stock of the unique alloy." "Good heavens! So the tall man—" "The tall man is the third member of the gang, the one who was not mentioned, the leader, the financier, the true brain of the operation. He survived whatever happened that night 20 years ago, and now, after all this time, he has tracked Wilson down. He wants the dies, and I suspect he will stop at nothing to get them." We returned to Baker Street to find the situation had escalated. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, her face pale. "Mr. Holmes, sir, I've been that worried. A man came asking for the gentleman upstairs, a very tall, intimidating man. "What did he say, Mrs. Hudson?" Holmes asked sharply. "He didn't say much, sir. Just asked if a Mr. Wilson was staying here. I told him, as you instructed, that we had no such guest. But his eyes, Mr. Holmes, they were dreadful. He just smiled, a thin, cold sort of smile, and said, 'He is here. Tell him that Mr. Aberley knows he is here. And tell him I have the patience of a stone.'" "Aberley!" Holmes exclaimed. "At last we have a name. Did you get a good look at him?" "That I did. Tallest man I've ever seen, and so thin his clothes seemed to hang off a frame of sticks. A long, pale face and dark, deep-set eyes." Holmes turned to me, his expression grim. "The hunter has found his quarry's burrow, Watson. We must act, and act quickly. Mr. Aberley will not be content with messages for long." He went upstairs and found our client in a state of near collapse. At the mention of the name Aberley, Wilson let out a cry of pure despair and sank to his knees. "It's him, Jonathan Aberley. I thought he died in the fire with Hobbes. It was his enterprise, his genius. Hobbes and I were just his tools." Under Holmes's relentless questioning, the full, sordid story finally came out. Aberley, a disgraced academic with a passion for antiquities and a sociopath's lack of conscience, had conceived the entire scheme. He had recruited the brilliant but amoral Hobbes to perfect the metal alloys and the young, artistically gifted Wilson to engrave the dies. The fire had been the result of a violent argument when Wilson demanded a larger share. In the struggle, a crucible of molten metal was overturned. Wilson, seeing his chance in the chaos, had grabbed the case containing the priceless dies for the rarest coins and fled, leaving his partners for dead. "He will kill me, Mr. Holmes. I know he will," Wilson wept. "He will do more than that," Holmes said coldly. "He will torture you first to find where you have hidden the dies. For 20 years you have lived a comfortable life on the proceeds of your crime. Now the bill has come due. Your only chance of survival is to do exactly as I say. Where are the dies, Mr. Wilson?" "They are in the vault of my bank, in Beddleton," the solicitor whispered. Holmes's eyes glittered. "Capital! Then that is where we shall set our trap. Aberley has tracked you from Beddleton. He will have watched your house, your office, your bank. He knows where they are. He has been tormenting you, breaking your nerve, to force you to retrieve them for him. We shall let him believe he has succeeded." Holmes's plan was as audacious as it was dangerous. Under the cover of darkness, Wilson would be smuggled out of Baker Street and placed on a late train back to Beddleton. I was to accompany him, acting as his guard. "Aberley will have a man watching this house, and another watching Paddington," Holmes explained, pacing excitedly. "He will expect Wilson to break and run. Your role, Watson, is to ensure Wilson reaches the bank tomorrow morning. Go to the vault. Retrieve the case. Aberley will make his move then. He will believe Wilson is isolated and vulnerable. Be armed, my dear fellow, but do not, under any circumstances, intervene unless Wilson's life is in immediate danger. I have another role to play." "And what is that, Holmes?" "I," he said with the thin smile, "am going to pay a visit to Mr. Jonathan Aberley myself. I have a theory about where a man of his peculiar talents and history might choose to establish his new base of operations." He would say no more, and with a final word of instruction, he disappeared into the London night, leaving me with our trembling client and the heavy weight of my service revolver in my pocket. The journey to Beddleton was a nightmare. Wilson started at every shadow, his breath catching in his throat each time the carriage door was opened. I sat opposite him, my hand never far from my weapon, my own nerves stretched to breaking point. We arrived in the sleeping market town in the dead of night and took rooms at a small inn, where Wilson spent the remaining hours until dawn pacing his room. The following morning, under a sky the colour of lead, we walked the short distance to the Beddleton Bank. The town seemed peaceful, almost idyllic, but I felt unseen eyes upon us from every window and doorway. Wilson, his face slick with sweat, signed the necessary papers, and a clerk led us down to the subterranean vault. With a heavy groan, the great iron door swung open, revealing rows of black deed boxes. Wilson located his own, and, with trembling fingers, produced a small leather case about the size of a book. "These are them," he whispered, his voice hoarse. As we ascended the steps back into the main hall of the bank, it happened. The door to the street opened, and two men entered. One was a burly, thuggish-looking fellow. The other was the man from my worst imaginings, Jonathan Abberley. He was unnaturally tall, well over 6'6", and possessed a cadaverous thinness that was almost inhuman. He was dressed in a well-tailored but severe black frock coat. His face was long and pale, dominated by a high, intellectual brow, and eyes so dark and deep-set they seemed like black pits. A thin, cruel smile played on his lips as his gaze fell upon the leather case in Wilson's hand. "My dear James," Abberley said, his voice a soft, cultured purr that was more menacing than any shout. "How good of you to fetch our little collection. I have missed it dearly. Do be a good fellow and hand it over." The bank staff were frozen in shock. Wilson seemed ready to faint. My own hand was inside my coat, my fingers wrapped around the butt of my revolver. "Now, Abberley," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You are covered. Make a move, and I'll—" Before I could finish, the burly man moved with astonishing speed, knocking a heavy inkstand from a clerk's desk. It crashed to the floor, and in that split second of distraction he lunged, not at me, but at Wilson. The solicitor cried out and fell back, dropping the case. Abberley scooped it up from the floor. "A pleasure doing business with you, gentlemen," he said with his chilling smile. Then he and his associate were gone, leaving the bank in an uproar. I rushed to Wilson's side. He was shaken but unharmed. My first instinct was to give chase, but Holmes's orders had been clear. I felt a surge of failure and frustration. We had lost. Abberley had the dies. We returned to the inn, dejected. I sent a lengthy telegram to Holmes detailing the disastrous turn of events. For the rest of the day we waited, every minute an agony. It was not until the following morning that we received a reply. It contained a simple London address and 2 words, "Come at once." We took the first available train. The address Holmes had provided led us to a grimy industrial part of Lambeth, a maze of workshops and small foundries that backed onto the oily waters of the Thames. We found the correct number above the door of a dilapidated brick building that declared itself, on a faded sign, to be Abberley & Co., Metallurgical Assayers. The door was unlocked. We stepped inside to a scene I shall never forget. The large, cluttered workshop was filled with furnaces, crucibles, and scientific apparatus. In the centre of the room, seated on a stool and bound securely with ropes, was the hulking form of Abberley's associate. Standing over him, a pistol in his hand, was Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. And there, by a workbench, calmly examining a set of steel dies through a jeweller's loop, was Sherlock Holmes. Lying on the floor, a dark blanket covering his impossibly long form, was the still figure of Jonathan Abberley. "Ah, Watson, Wilson, glad you could make it," Holmes said cheerfully without looking up. "You have arrived just in time to see the conclusion of this fascinating little drama." "Holmes, what on earth has happened?" I exclaimed. "A simple application of logic, my dear fellow. While you were leading our friends on a merry chase in the country, I was making some inquiries here in town. I reasoned that a man like Abberley, a master forger, would need a base of operations, a workshop. Where better to hide than in plain sight? A metallurgical assaying business provided the perfect cover for his illicit foundry. I located this establishment yesterday afternoon." "You confronted him alone?" "I did. I found him here, gloating over the case you had so kindly delivered into his hands. He was, I must confess, a formidable opponent, a brilliant but utterly twisted mind. He had no intention of allowing his old partner Wilson to live, of course. His plan was to melt down the original dies after creating a new master set, thereby erasing the last link to his past. Unfortunately for him, his conversation with me was interrupted." Holmes nodded towards the bound man. "This gentleman, Mr. Brusin." "Brusen," dictamer to stage. Moran returned from his errands. A struggle ensued. Abberley, in his arrogance, believed he could dispose of me as he had planned to dispose of Wilson. He drew a weapon, a rather nasty little derringer. I was compelled to defend myself. Lestrade and his men, whom I had instructed to wait nearby, arrived to find the conflict resolved. Lestrade grunted. "Resolved is one word for it. The tall fellow won't be troubling anyone again, Mr. Holmes. You have a knack for tidying up the city's loose ends." Holmes turned his attention to Wilson, who was staring at the covered form on the floor, his face a mixture of terror and profound relief. "Mr. Wilson," Holmes said, and his voice was like ice, "you are a scoundrel and a liar. You used my services under false pretenses and were complicit in a major criminal enterprise. However, you were also the intended victim of a murder. The law, I think, will have little to hold you on after so many years, provided you give a full confession. As for these," he held up the steel dies, "they will be going to the British Museum, where their genius can be studied rather than used to corrupt the market. I suggest you return to Beddleton and live out the remainder of your days in genuine rather than feigned honesty. Your ghost, I believe, is finally laid." Later that evening, back in the comforting clutter of our Baker Street rooms, with a cheerful fire crackling in the grate, Holmes finally elaborated. The key, Watson, was Wilson's fundamental lie. He was terrified, but his explanation for his terror was illogical. A man seeking revenge after 20 years for a father's imprisonment might haunt and threaten. But the sheer, nerve-shredding persistence of Abberley's campaign suggested a different motive. It was not punishment he was after, but an object. He was not trying to drive Wilson to his death, but to drive him to act, to retrieve the one thing Abberley could not get himself. Once I discarded the revenge motive and substituted an acquisitive one, everything fell into place. The fire, the coining, Wilson's artistic talent, it all pointed to a crime of immense value and skill. Abberley outwitted himself, Watson. His very cleverness in tracking Wilson and tormenting him was what led him to our door, and ultimately to his own destruction. It is a recurring lesson, my friend. The cleverest criminals are often undone by their own complexity. He picked up his violin from the corner, tucked it under his chin, and began to draw the bow across the strings, losing himself in one of those strange, melancholic improvisations of his. As the music filled the foggy London air, I picked up my pen and began to write, determined that this most singular case of the tall man, the terrified solicitor, and the master forger should not be lost to the world.